So we have some interesting news when it comes to Impact Wrestling, and former Impact Wrestling, or maybe not former Impact Wrestling knockout Kylie Rae, because Kylie Rae is returning to pro wrestling. Now, Warrior Wrestling recently announced that Kylie Rae is returning to the Squared Circle in the future, wrestling at their June 5th Stadium Series show. They tweeted, quote, "Smiley Kylie Rae, she's back. Saturday, June 5th, Warrior Wrestling Chicago defending her title. Match announcement to follow, but the timing of this announcement may give you a clue." Now, Rae is currently the reigning Warrior Wrestling Women's Champion, having captured the championship, ironically, from former Impact World Champion Tessa Blanchard back on September 12th in 2020. Now, of course, Kylie Rae stepped away from professional wrestling, stepped away from the Squared Circle in November of 2020, and announced on her Patreon page that she was, quote, "currently unwell," and also, quote, "no longer a professional wrestler." Now, days before this post, of course, Kylie Rae was scheduled to face Deonna Purrazzo at Impact Wrestling's Bound for Glory event for the Knockouts Championship, but of course she didn't appear at the event, and she was absent from it, and she was later replaced by Sue Young. Now, it would later find out that Kylie Rae was scheduled to appear that day. She did travel to Nashville for Bound for Glory, but for some undisclosed medical reasons, she was unable to compete, and she stepped away from professional wrestling and Impact Wrestling. Now, it gets further more interesting here because, according to Mike Johnson of PW Insider, Kylie Rae does remain still under contract with Impact Wrestling. Now, she signed a long-term deal with the promotion back in March of 2020, and the contract has remained active after she stepped away from the ring. So why is that significant? Well, one could argue that it's significant because if Kylie Rae's getting back to doing professional wrestling and she's still under contract to Impact Wrestling, there is a possibility, of course, that she could appear on Impact once more in the future. Now, will she, won't she? It's a very difficult thing to predict. It's a very difficult thing to predict, and again, and I spoke about this at the time, the videos are out there, it's a really difficult thing to discuss, and ultimately, when it comes to any of this, when it came to Kylie Rae stepping away from not just Impact Wrestling, but professional wrestling in general last year, back in October, November time, the important thing and the critical thing was Kylie Rae's health. Her health and her happiness, that's always paramount. You know, we can be fans of professional wrestling, and we are. We can be fans of Impact Wrestling, and we are. I think a lot of people in the community here for Wrestle News 365 are fans of Impact Wrestling, and they like to hear us talk about Impact Wrestling, all of the news, the storylines, the backstage information, all that kind of stuff, and that's what we like to talk about. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's just pro wrestling. It's just pro wrestling, and health and happiness and everything like that is far, far more important. So my stance on that hasn't really changed from back then, in that, you know, Kylie Rae's happiness and her health, more importantly, that's far more important than Impact Wrestling. Now, if she's happy to come back to pro wrestling, if she's happy to jump back into the Squared Circle, if she's happy to get back in amongst it, then maybe there's a possibility for her to come back to Impact Wrestling in the future. She is under contract, so again, I don't know the details of her contract. Obviously, the details of her contract are that she can take specific and select independent dates outside of her Impact Wrestling deal. That's how she was able to work for Warrior Wrestling in the first place. I don't know if she needs, you know, approval by Impact Wrestling to take those tapings or take those bookings, rather. I don't know. I really don't know if that is or that isn't the case. I think it's an interesting situation. Of course, it could just be a situation whereby, look, she is the women's champion for Warrior Wrestling, and maybe it's just a case of she still has plans to step away and she still has plans to retire and not come back to professional wrestling, but this is her way of trying to fulfill the remaining commitments that she has. Maybe she had a commitment or made a commitment a while ago saying, you know what, I am the champion for this promotion, it's only right that I go back and I drop the championship to whoever they want to put the title on next, and then I can go away. Maybe that's the case, and maybe Kylie Rae wants to have a proper final farewell, and she wants to have an actual retirement match as opposed to just disappearing off Impact Wrestling television, as was the case last year for Bound for Glory. Maybe that is the case in that sense, and if that is the case, then again, that's her prerogative. That's her prerogative, and it's just interesting. It's interesting because obviously the flip side of it is, of course, that Kylie Rae might be, you know, dipping her toe back into the water, as it was, and seeing how she feels about coming back and competing, and if she feels not just comfortable, but if she feels that she's, you know, of the right health to come back, then that's great, because there's no doubt. There's no doubt with any of this, and I think maybe this is why some fans are so. Again, I want to use my words properly here, but so upset that Kylie Rae was stepping away is because she is a great pro wrestler. She's very, very good at what she does. She's a great character inside the ring. She's a great talker. She's got a really, a great energy about her, and it's vivacious. I mean, it really does translate to fans watching at home and watching her live when she competes in person. And she was obviously a massive asset to the Knockouts division. I mean, it's highly, highly likely. I know that Su Yung actually won the championship at Bound for Glory, the Knockouts championship, from Deonna Purrazzo. She subsequently dropped it back to Deonna Purrazzo pretty quickly, but I think it's very obvious that Kylie Rae was scheduled to win the Knockouts championship at Bound for Glory. I don't know if that has or hasn't been confirmed. I think it has. I vaguely remember seeing and reading a report that Kylie Rae was scheduled to win the Knockouts championship at Bound for Glory in November, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, frankly. So if Kylie Rae does come back, it's a massive addition to the Impact Wrestling Knockouts roster, and they've just lost some names recently, one of them being Taya Valkyrie on the Knockout side of things, and having Kylie Rae back and competing on the roster would be a massive asset to what already is a very strong division, and maybe eventually we could work towards getting towards that match between Kylie Rae and Deonna Purrazzo. Will we get there? Ultimately we don't know. We don't know, and I think it's unfair to put that kind of pressure on Kylie Rae anyway, straight from the office, to say, all right, she's back Warrior Wrestling, that means she's going to be back with Impact Wrestling, she's going to be doing this, she's going to be doing that, she's going to be facing Deonna Purrazzo and all that kind of stuff. It could just be a one-off. It could just be a one-off and just dropping the title, and then Kylie Rae realizes, you know what, I don't need pro wrestling, I'm happy in doing whatever I'm doing, and as fans we need to respect that and we need to encourage that. We need to encourage fans, pro wrestlers, not just to come back for our happiness or anything like that. It's their happiness that is the most important in the first place. That's always the way of anyone in any form of employment, any form of job. So Kylie Rae is making a return to Warrior Wrestling. We don't know the circumstances surrounding that, and we don't know the circumstances surrounding if she will ever return to Impact Wrestling, but she is currently under contract, so there is obviously a possibility, and maybe this does lead to other stuff in the future, of course, which would be very, very exciting, and it would be exciting and a massive asset to Impact Wrestling too. Now, another thing that I did want to talk about before we wrap it up was that we do have an Impact World Tag Team Championship match set for Impact Wrestling Rebellion, and that is a rematch from Sacrifice. Now, Impact has announced an Impact World Tag Team Championship match for next month's Rebellion pay-per-view. The Good Brothers, Kyle Anderson and Doc Gallows, will get their Sacrifice rematch, facing off against new champions David Finlay and Juice Robinson, aka Finn Juice. The Good Brothers confronted Finn Juice on this week's episode of Impact Wrestling on Access TV, demanding a title match, saying they were not ready to defend the championships against them at Sacrifice last weekend. Finlay and Robinson said they were going back to Japan and wouldn't be back until April. The two teams then ended up brawling. Backstage, the Good Brothers complained to Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore about the champions leaving to go back to New Japan Pro Wrestling. D'Amore then made the rematch for Rebellion on April 24. Now that is certainly, I think, very interesting because let's be very honest and transparent here. If the match at Impact Rebellion is a rematch from Sacrifice, I just can't see that happening. I just can't see that happening. I don't think they would do that. And that's not to say that the match at Rebellion won't be good, because it will. The match at Sacrifice was fantastic between the Good Brothers and Finn Juice. The only thing I would think with that is that you've already done it, and you did it for an Impact Plus event. It feels very unlike Impact Wrestling, considering they have 4 big pay-per-views a year. They have Hard to Kill, they have Rebellion, they have Slammiversary, they have Bound for Glory. It would seem really unlike Impact Wrestling to have on one of their biggest shows of the year, especially considering the main event, the title versus title match of AEW World Champion Kenny Omega and Impact World Champion Rich Swann. It feels very unlikely that Impact Wrestling would just make a big match, another interpromotional match between a New Japan tag team and an Impact tag team. Oh, we'll just do a rematch of what we did in March at Sacrifice. That doesn't feel like something Impact would do. And I think as fans, you would be like, well, I watched it last month. Why should I watch it again? I know we've got different champions this time, but where's the stakes there? So I wouldn't be surprised, and again, I don't know this. This is just pure speculation at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if that match does change between now and Rebellion, and we have another tag team being added in there. As far as what tag team that would be, I think there's a plethora of names that come to mind, and to be honest, the big names that come to mind aren't actually involved in Impact Wrestling. I think the biggest thing that Impact Wrestling could do when it comes to the tag team division, which is very strong in Impact Wrestling, but the biggest thing they could do when it comes to this tag team championship situation at Rebellion is have a New Japan tag team, in being FinJuice, an Impact Wrestling tag team, being the Good Brothers, and an AEW tag team. Now, what would that AEW tag team be? Well, there's a couple of options. Obviously, the most obvious one would probably be the AEW World Tag Team Champions themselves, the Young Bucks. Now, they've teased for a while, and they've kind of pulled back from it, but they've teased for a while that we were going to get a Good Brothers versus Young Bucks match at some point. When is that going to be? I don't know. I think maybe Double or Nothing is a possibility, but that's after Rebellion. So maybe that's something to consider after Rebellion. Another team that is obviously a massive possibility from AEW is Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston. Because, of course, the Good Brothers were instrumental in costing Jon Moxley the AEW World Championship at AEW Revolution a couple of weeks ago. They got involved in the exploding barbed wire death match with Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley. So Jon Moxley certainly has an axe to grind against the Good Brothers. And, of course, this past week on Dynamite, Moxley and Kingston, now best friends once more, they face off, didn't they, against the Good Brothers. So maybe they could translate that over to Impact Wrestling. How can we hurt the Good Brothers and Kenny Omega even more? We can steal their Impact World Tag Team Championships from a New Japan tag team. Just think in terms of the status, how big that match would be. You've got a New Japan tag team that is the Impact World Tag Team Champions facing off against an Impact tag team, one of the biggest tag teams in the world, really, in the Good Brothers. And the other team in that match is an AEW tag team, so it's New Japan versus Impact versus AEW. But the AEW tag team is one of the biggest stars in the world right now when it comes to pro wrestling, Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston, who is also a former Impact Wrestling talent. I mean, there's just so much story. There is so much story there to be told, and that could be something really, really special. And talk about a massive pay-per-view. It's a huge pay-per-view anyway, because irrespective of everything else that happens on that card, the main event, title versus title, AEW World Champion versus Impact World Champion, Kenny Omega versus Rich Swann, the pay-per-view sells itself. The pay-per-view will have so much buzz and momentum heading into it just because of the main event. But if you're Impact Wrestling, why not make it even bigger? Yes, of course, coming out of the show, anything's going to be newsworthy considering that main event, but if you have almost a double main event in the sense of you've got that main event, title versus title, AEW versus Impact Wrestling, World Champion versus World Champion, but you've also got a tag team match, an interpromotional tag team match, where you've got a tag team from 3 separate promotions facing off at the Impact World Tag Team Championship, that would be ginormous. That would be huge. It would be a real monumental event, and it would just be another reason that Impact Rebellion becomes must-see. I think personally that this Impact Rebellion event, this pay-per-view event, is going to be close to having the success that Slammiversary did in July. I think looking at all of the pay-per-views that Impact have done over the last sort of 12 months or so, Slammiversary was a massive, massive success for Impact Wrestling. I mean, we don't have the figures in terms of the buy rate, but just in terms of the social media stuff that Impact was doing at the time. I mean, they were trending worldwide. They had a real buzz about them because of the WWE signings, the returns, the former champions, etc. returning. Impact Wrestling really got a lot of buzz at the time. And then it kind of dissipated a little bit. I don't think Bound for Glory was as successful as Slammiversary in July. But then once they had this Impact Wrestling and AEW working relationship, everything's just exploded again. You're having record ratings on Access TV. You're having quadrupling the records on Twitch. And everything just kind of feels to be clicking a little bit for Impact Wrestling recently. Not to the levels that they were in the mid-2000s. I think people that try and compare this to then is kind of ludicrous, frankly. But they're going to be doing some really big business, and one of these big bits of business, is this Rebellion pay-per-view. And I think, obviously, as I mentioned, the main event sells itself, and the main event really sells the pay-per-view. But if you can add in some other big matches, then again, that's going to get people talking, and that's going to get people very, very excited for Rebellion. If they can turn a sacrifice rematch into a first-time ever interpromotional match with 3 tag teams from 3 separate promotions, that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. And again, I don't know if they're going to do that. They might just add in another Impact Wrestling tag team, whether it's maybe Chris Sabin and James Storm, maybe even Alex Shelley comes back at that point. I don't know. I just would be very surprised to see a sacrifice rematch take place. It's a big match anyway, and it'll be a great match, but again, we've seen it. That would be my response to that. We've seen it. So certainly it's going to be interesting to see where they go with this. But of course, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Kylie Rae returning to professional wrestling. Is she going to return to Impact Wrestling in the near future? And the tag team title match being set for Impact Rebellion between Finn Juice and the Good Brothers. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.